My name is Thraxic. For 12 cycles, I served as senior analyst for the Galactic Concordance Strategic Assessment Bureau. In that time, I documented the rise and fall of over 150 interstellar alliances. I studied the crystalline hierarchies of the Forlac Dominion, the hive mind collectives of the Xylos Swarm, and the Neuralink councils of the Thren. I believed I understood every variable that governed diplomatic relationships between species. Then I met humans. I am a Xylary, a species renowned across 7 sectors for logical precision and emotional detachment. We do not form attachments. We do not make decisions based on sentiment. We observe, calculate, and conclude. This is why the Concordance appointed me to investigate what diplomatic briefings now call the human anomaly. The anomaly, as first presented, seemed straightforward. For months ago, the human delegation arrived at Concordance Station Prime with a mutual defense proposal for the Karathi Empire, a mid-tier military power with valuable territorial holdings. The Karathi, practical if somewhat arrogant, accepted within 5 weeks. Human military advisors completely restructured Karathi defense protocols, introduced 16 previously unknown tactical frameworks, and somehow convinced the notoriously rigid Karathi High Command to adopt what humans call adaptive warfare doctrine. The results were immediate. A border conflict with the aggressive Vrakan clans, stalemated for 3 years, ended in 2 weeks. The Vrakan, bewildered by tactics they had never encountered, sued for peace and withdrew from 3 disputed sectors. The Karathi were ecstatic. The Concordance was alarmed. I was assigned to determine whether humanity represented a strategic asset or an existential threat. I began my investigation with data, raw, unfiltered, comprehensive. I compiled military reports, diplomatic transcripts, economic analyses, cultural studies. I interviewed 53 species who had encountered humans. I watched thousands of hours of archive footage from human vessel colonies and diplomatic functions. The more I learned, the less I understood. Humans should not be effective allies. By every measurable standard, they are deeply flawed. They are emotional to the point of irrationality. They form attachments to abstract concepts like honor and justice, concepts with no quantifiable value. They hold grudges for decades. They argue constantly among themselves about matters of philosophy, ethics, and what they call sports. They name their warships things like Unbreakable Promise and Bad Decision, as if warfare were some elaborate joke. Yet somehow they win, not always immediately, not always cleanly, but with a consistency that defies statistical probability. I scheduled my first direct interview with Ambassador James Okonkwo, humanity's chief representative to the Concordance. We met in a neutral conference room on level 47. He arrived precisely on time, carrying a small thermal container that emitted an aroma I later learned was coffee, a mildly psychoactive stimulant humans consume in staggering quantities. He was taller than most humans I had studied, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair and a calm, assessing gaze of someone accustomed to being underestimated. He wore the standard diplomatic uniform, a dark suit designed to project competence without ostentation. He smiled when he saw me, engaging far more facial muscles than most species require for equivalent social signals. "Analyst Thraxic," he said, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. I touched it briefly as protocol required. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "Thank you for meeting with me." "The Concordance requires clarification on several matters," I replied, settling into my seat. "Your species has formed alliances with unusual speed and achieved results suggesting either remarkable military innovation or significant information advantages we have not detected. Or both," he said pleasantly, sitting across from me. "We're pretty good at both." I activated my recording device. "The Karathi Defense Restructuring. Explain your methodologies." He took a sip from his thermal container. "Which methodology specifically?" "We implemented 43 distinct operational changes. Begin with the tactical doctrine you introduced. The Karathi report calls it adaptive unpredictability patterns." His smile widened slightly. "We taught them to be creative." I waited for elaboration. He seemed content to let the silence stretch. "Creative," I repeated finally, "is not a tactical parameter." "Sure it is," he said. "The Vrakan have been fighting the Karathi for 3 years. They had databases full of Karathi tactical responses. They could predict with 94% accuracy what the Karathi would do in any given combat scenario. So we taught the Karathi to stop being predictable. By what mechanism? By encouraging them to trust their instincts instead of their protocols. I felt the first stirrings of what humans might call frustration. Instincts are biological imperatives, not strategic frameworks. Are they? Ambassador Okonkwo leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Analyst Thraxic, when you're analyzing data and something feels wrong even though the numbers seem correct, do you ignore that feeling? I did not answer immediately. In truth, I had experienced such moments. All analysts do, but admitting to subjective judgment felt dangerously close to admitting irrationality. Pattern recognition, I said carefully, is a learned skill based on accumulated experience. Exactly, he said, as if I had proven his point. And what we taught the Karathi was that their accumulated experience, their gut feelings about what might work in a specific moment, were just as valuable as their pre-programmed responses. Maybe more valuable, because the enemy couldn't predict them. The Vrakan military is formidable. I countered. They have conquered 19 systems. They do not lose to mere unpredictability. No, he agreed. They lose to unpredictability combined with overwhelming commitment to the fight. That's the other thing we taught the Karathi, that if you're going to do something, do it all the way. No half measures. No careful preservation of resources for the next engagement. You fight like this battle is the only battle that matters, because in that moment, it is... I made several notes. This philosophy seems tactically unsustainable. What if you lose? Then you lose completely and learn something valuable for the next fight. He shrugged, a gesture of apparent indifference that I suspected masked deeper conviction. The Karathi were losing slowly for 3 years because they were trying not to lose. We taught them to try to win instead. Big difference. Over the next hour, he walked me through 16 other tactical innovations, each more bizarre than the last. Humans had taught the Karathi to use music during combat to maintain morale and coordination. They had introduced something called psychological disruption, verbal taunting that somehow made enemy gunners hesitate. They had even convinced the Karathi to paint their ships in what humans called intimidation patterns, colors and designs that served no tactical function, but apparently affected enemy targeting accuracy by an average of 0.8 seconds. It was absurd. It was unmeasurable. It was working. Let me ask you a different question, I said, setting aside my data tablet. Why do you want allies at all? Your species has considerable military capacity. You have economic independence. What do you gain from these partnerships? For the first time, Okonkwo's pleasant demeanor shifted. Not to hostility, but to something more serious, more genuine. We gain friends, he said simply. We gain people who will stand with us when things get bad. And trust me, analyst, things always get bad eventually. Friendship is not a strategic asset, isn't it? He finished his coffee and set the container aside. How many of your carefully calculated alliances have held together when the real shooting started? How many species have abandoned their treaties the moment it became inconvenient to honor them? I said nothing. The answer was approximately 67%. Humans make terrible fair-weather allies, he continued. We argue too much. We push back against bad ideas even when it's diplomatically awkward. We remember every slight and every favor with equal intensity. We will absolutely tell you when we think you're making a mistake, and we will not shut up about it until you either fix it or prove us wrong. This does not sound like an endorsement of your species. But, he said, and his voice took on an edge I had not heard before, when the fight comes, when everything is falling apart and the odds are impossible and everyone else is running for the exits, we will still be there. We will burn our own ships if it means protecting yours. We will hold the line until our bones break and our lungs give out. We will make our last stand on your soil, defending your people, because once we call you friend, once we call you ally, you become part of our tribe. And humans do not abandon their tribe, ever. The silence that followed was profound. I thought of the data I had reviewed, of the 83 recorded instances where human forces had sustained catastrophic casualties while defending allies. of the economic support packages humanity had extended to struggling partners despite their own resource limitations, of the 21 near wars humanity had walked into because a treaty partner had been threatened. You understand, I said slowly, that this makes you simultaneously the most valuable and most dangerous ally in the known galaxy. He smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. Yeah, we know. That's why you're investigating us, Okonkwo continued. The Concordance has concerns. The Concordance is terrified. Of what precisely? Of us. He leaned back in his chair. Because they've built an entire political structure on calculated self-interest. Treaties that last only as long as they're convenient. Alliances that shift with every strategic wind. And we just showed up and demonstrated that genuine commitment works better. That scares species who have spent centuries perfecting the art of strategic abandonment. I deactivated my recording device. What you're describing is not sustainable. History disagrees. He stood, preparing to leave. Humanity has been forming alliances based on genuine loyalty for thousands of years. Sometimes we get betrayed. Sometimes we make terrible choices about who to trust. But we keep doing it anyway, because we've learned something that your concordance apparently hasn't. That the only way to have reliable allies is to be a reliable ally. He moved toward the door, then paused. You want to know the real secret of human diplomatic success, analyst? It's not our tactics or our technology or our clever strategies. It's that when we say we'll stand with you, we actually mean it. And in a galaxy full of species who treat every alliance as a temporary arrangement pending better offers, that kind of commitment is so rare it might as well be a superweapon. The door closed behind him, leaving me alone with my thoughts and several thousand pages of data that suddenly seemed far less relevant than they had an hour ago. I spent the next 3 days reviewing every recorded human military engagement, paying particular attention not to tactics employed, but to broader strategic patterns. What I found disturbed me deeply. Humanity did not fight to win battles. They fought to win wars. And they seemed willing to lose every battle, if it meant ultimate victory in the conflict that mattered. They took enormous casualties defending positions with minimal tactical value, but significant symbolic importance to their allies. They spent resources protecting civilian populations when military targets would have been more strategically efficient. They negotiated peace treaties that gave them far less than they could have taken by force, apparently because they preferred gratitude to conquest. And most troubling of all, they remembered everything. I found records of human diplomatic delegations referencing military assistance provided to their species over 500 years ago. I found economic partnerships based on debts of honor that predated human spaceflight. I found humans maintaining positive relations with species who had betrayed them in the past, not because they had forgotten, but because they had decided a relationship was worth the risk of future betrayal. It was magnificently irrational. It was also terrifyingly effective. My second interview was with Commander Amara Okafor, the human military liaison who had personally overseen the Karathi defense restructuring. She was broader than Okonkwo, with a heavily muscle-built common among human military personnel. Her face bore several scars I recognized from my research as combat injuries, deliberately left unrepaired as status signaling within human warrior culture. She did not bring coffee. She brought something called whiskey in a small metal flask. Ambassador Okonkwo says you're trying to figure out if we're dangerous, she said without preamble. Want my opinion? Your assessment will be valuable. We're extremely dangerous, she said cheerfully, but probably not in the way you think. I activated my recording device. Explain. She took a drink from her flask. You know what makes humans dangerous, analyst? It's not that we're better fighters than anyone else. Plenty of species can match us in straight combat. The Vraken, for example. Hell of a military culture. Respect them immensely. Then what is the danger? We care too much. She said it like a confession. When we make a commitment, it stops being a strategic decision and becomes personal. We will absolutely torch our own strategic position if it means keeping our word to an ally. We will start wars we can't win because someone we care about got hurt. We will hold grudges for generations and refuse perfectly reasonable diplomatic solutions because we remember what you did to our friends. This seems like profound weakness. Does it? She leaned back. Let me tell you about the Karathi situation. You know why the Vrakan sued for peace so fast. The tactical innovations were highly effective. No, she smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. They sued for peace because 3 weeks into the fighting, we made it clear that we would keep escalating until they backed off. No negotiation, no compromise, just continuous creative escalation until they gave up or we ran out of ideas. And analyst, humans never run out of ideas for making our enemies miserable. She took another drink. The Vrakan are warriors. They understand strength. What they don't understand is commitment. That doesn't make strategic sense. They couldn't figure out why we were willing to risk so much for a species we'd only allied with 6 weeks earlier. And that confusion, that inability to predict our breaking point, because we apparently don't have one when it comes to protecting allies, that's what won the war. I made several notes. You weaponized your irrational loyalty. We weaponized our character, she corrected. There's a difference. Anyone can be loyal when it's convenient, Commander Okafor continued. Humans are loyal when it's catastrophically stupid to be loyal, and everyone knows it. That makes us unpredictable in exactly the way that terrifies species who think wars are about calculation instead of conviction. Wars are about calculation, I insisted. She looked at me with something like pity. Wars are about who's willing to keep fighting after the calculations say they should quit. And humans will fight long past that point if we think the cause matters. She stood, preparing to leave. You want my advice, analyst? Don't try to figure out if we're good allies or bad allies. We're both. We're the best allies you'll ever have right up until the moment we're the worst enemy you could imagine. What determines which one you get is pretty simple. And that is, don't betray us. She moved toward the door. Because we will remember. We will wait as long as necessary. And eventually, when you've forgotten all about it and moved on to your next strategic priority, we will show up and collect every debt you owe us, with interest compounded over however many years or centuries it takes. Humans have toppled empires over insults delivered generations before. We've gone to war over broken promises our great-grandparents witnessed. Time doesn't heal our wounds, analyst. It just gives us more time to plan our response. The door closed. I sat alone in the conference room for 47 minutes, reviewing my notes and trying to formulate a recommendation for concordance. The data was clear. Humans were exceptional allies under most circumstances. They provided innovative tactical support. They honored commitments beyond any reasonable expectation. They built genuine relationships rather than calculated partnerships. But they were also capable of sustaining multi-generational grudges that made long-term strategic planning nearly impossible. They would sacrifice their own interests to protect allies in ways that suggested emotional instability, and their unpredictability made them impossible to fully trust, even as their loyalty made them impossible to abandon. I was preparing to schedule my final interview when the emergency alert activated across Concordance Station Prime. The Forlac Dominion, one of the Concordance's oldest and most powerful members, had just declared war on the recently admitted Pelthian Commonwealth. The stated reason was a territorial dispute over mining rights in the Outer Rim. The real reason, which became clear within hours, was that the Forlac had decided to test Concordance resolve by attacking the weakest member they could find. The Pelthians had virtually no military capacity. They had joined the Concordance seeking protection, not expecting to need it within weeks of ratification. The Concordance convened an emergency session. I attended as an observer, watching as species after species offered carefully worded expressions of concern while proposing no concrete action. The calculations were obvious. The Pelthians were not strategically valuable. Defending them would be expensive. The Forlac were powerful enough to make any military intervention costly. Better to express sympathy and move on. I noticed Ambassador Okonkwo sitting in the human delegation area, his face carefully neutral as speaker after speaker explained why immediate intervention was impossible. Then he stood. The Terran Alliance, he said clearly, his voice cutting across the diplomatic murmurs, recognizes the Pelthian Commonwealth as a sovereign Concordance member entitled to full collective defense protocols. We will deploy military assets to Pelthian space immediately and engage any Forlac forces that threaten their territory. We invite other members to join us, but we will go regardless of who comes." The chamber fell completely silent. The Forlac ambassador, a towering crystalline being named Karthak, rose from his seat. "You would go to war over a species you have never even met? For territory that holds no value to your interests?" Okonkwo looked directly at him. "We would go to war because they are Concordance members and therefore under collective protection. The value of a treaty doesn't change based on strategic convenience." "You are either brave or suicidal," Karthak said, his crystalline structure resonating with contempt. "The Terran Alliance is a minor power with limited resources. The Forlac Dominion will crush you and take the Pelthian systems regardless of your intervention." "Maybe," Okonkwo agreed. "Or maybe you'll discover that humans are really good at making military interventions way more expensive than anyone thought possible. You want to find out which one happens." Karthak stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked around the chamber, clearly expecting other species to condemn humanity's aggressive stance. No one spoke, because everyone in that room had read the same reports I had. Everyone knew what humans did to enemies who threatened their allies, and no one wanted to discover what 500 years of human military innovation looked like when deployed with absolute commitment and zero restraint. After 17 seconds of silence, an eternity in diplomatic proceedings, Ambassador Karthak made a gesture of dismissal. "The Forlac Dominion will reconsider its position regarding the Pelthian mining dispute." "Excellent choice," Ambassador Okonkwo said pleasantly. "We look forward to continued productive diplomatic relations." The session ended shortly after. I found myself walking toward the human delegation area, drawn by something I could not quite name. Okonkwo saw me approaching and smiled. "Still try to figure out if we're dangerous. Analyst?" "I believe," I said slowly, "that I have reached a conclusion. And you are the most dangerous species I have ever encountered." I told him, "Because you mean what you say. In a galaxy built on calculated deception and strategic flexibility, you actually mean what you say. And I cannot determine whether that makes you the solution to the Concordance's systemic problems or the greatest threat to galactic stability since the Convergence Wars." His smile softened into something almost sad. "Yeah, we get that a lot. What will you do now?" He glanced toward the viewing port where the stars stretched endlessly across the darkness. Now we go have a drink with the Pelthian ambassador and welcome them properly to the community of species who understand that treaties actually mean something. Want to join us?" I considered the invitation. By every rational measure, I should refuse. Socializing with investigation subjects was inappropriate. My report was incomplete. I had 17 more interviews scheduled, but something in his expression, something the absolute certainty with which he had faced down a superior military power over a principle that held no strategic value, made me reconsider what rationality actually meant. "Yes," I heard myself say, "I would like that very much." The human embassy occupied a modest section of level 32, far smaller than the sprawling crystalline complexes of the Forlac or the neural-linked habitat pods of the Thren. The entrance bore no imposing monuments. Instead, there was a simple wooden door, genuine organic when ported at staggering expense across light years of space, with a small plaque that read "Welcome" in 47 languages. Inside, I heard laughter. The interior was filled with beings from at least a dozen species gathered in small groups around what humans called a bar. The Pelthian ambassador, a slight being with bioluminescent skin patterns, currently pulsing with relief, sat at a corner table surrounded by 3 human military officers who seemed to be teaching them a card game. Analyst Thraxic, Okonkwo said, guiding me toward the bar. "This is Lieutenant Jameson, our head of embassy security." Jameson, Analyst Thraxic, is a Xylari who's been trying to figure out if we're insane or brilliant. Jameson, a compact human with close-crop hair and the alert posture of professional military personnel, extended her hand. "Probably both, sir. Can I get you something to drink? We've got Xylari mineral suspension, or, if you're feeling adventurous, I make 'em mean old-fashioned." I do not understand that reference. "Human cocktail," Okonkwo explained. Pre-spaceflight era whiskey, sugar, bitters, orange peel. Completely unsuitable for xylary biochemistry, but excellent for human morale. The mineral suspension will suffice. As Jameson prepared my drink, I observed the room. The Pelthian ambassador's bioluminescent patterns had shifted from panic orange to calm blue-green. They were laughing at something one of the human officers had said. The transformation was remarkable. You risked war for a species you had never met, I said. The strategic calculations suggested this was profoundly irrational. Okonkwo sipped his own drink. Strategic calculations don't account for the fact that letting bullies win makes more bullies. The Forlac needed to learn that Concordance membership means something. The Pelthians needed to learn they weren't alone. Both lessons required the same action. The Forlac have not forgotten this humiliation. Good. His expression hardened slightly. I want them to remember. I want every species in this galaxy to remember that humanity will show up when you threaten our allies. That reputation is worth more than any strategic calculation. Jameson rejoined us. Ambassador, the Karathi delegation just transmitted their gratitude. Apparently, the Vraken withdrew from another 2 disputed sectors without military engagement. They cited diplomatic reassessment of strategic priorities, which I'm pretty sure means they don't want to find out what we do if they keep pushing. Excellent. Send our compliments. I felt compelled to interject. You understand that you are creating a network of dependencies? Species will come to rely on human intervention, human innovation, human protection. This centralizes enormous power in your hands. Okonkwo set his drink down and looked at me directly. Does it? Or does it create a network of mutual support, where everyone contributes what they're good at? The Karathi have exceptional manufacturing capacity. The Pelthians have advanced medical technology. The Thren have computational processing that makes our AI look primitive. We're not building an empire, analyst. We're building a community. Someone has to be willing to enforce the rules, Jameson added cheerfully. Or they're not really rules. Humans are pretty good at enforcement because we actually care enough to follow through. Most species talk a good game, but fold the moment things get expensive. I thought about my 12 cycles of data, about the 67% of alliances that dissolved when tested by actual conflict, about the careful diplomatic language that meant we support you unless it costs us anything significant. This cannot scale indefinitely, I said. Eventually you will face a threat large enough that commitment alone cannot overcome it. What happens when you encounter an enemy that does not care about your loyalty, your determination, or your creative tactical innovations? Okonkwo smiled. There was no humor in it. Then we lose. We lose spectacularly and completely, and probably take a lot of our enemies with us in the process. But you know what? Our allies will remember that we went down fighting for them. And maybe, just maybe, that memory will inspire them to fight a little harder the next time someone threatens them. Legacy matters, analyst. What you leave behind matters. Before I could respond, my communication device activated with an emergency priority signal. The message was brief and devastating. The Vrex Dominion, a massive military power from the Galactic Core, had just declared its intention to annex the Karathi Empire. Their justification: the Karathi's recent military success, enabled by human tactical consultation, represented a destabilizing threat to regional security. The subtext was obvious. The Vrex were terrified that human tactical doctrine would spread throughout their sphere of influence and undermine the military superiority they had maintained for centuries. Okonkwo's device activated simultaneously. He read the message, and his expression shifted into something cold and calculating that I had not seen before. Jameson, he said quietly, activate Protocol 7. Full deployment. Jameson's casual demeanor evaporated instantly. Sir, Protocol 7 is total war mobilization. Are you certain? The Vrex just threatened a Concordance member and a human ally. His voice was absolutely flat. Yes, I'm certain. I felt obligated to intervene. Ambassador, the Vrex Dominion controls 200 systems. Their military capacity exceeds humanity's by a factor of 40. This is not a war you can win. Probably not, he agreed. But it's a war we can make so expensive that the Vrex will regret starting it for the next 3 centuries. And that's good enough. You would sacrifice your entire civilization to make a point. He looked at me with an expression that combined pity and determination in equal measure. We would sacrifice our entire civilization to prove that treaties mean something. Because if we don't, Ambassador Okonkwo continued, his voice unwavering, if we let the Vrex take the Karathi without consequences, then every alliance in this galaxy becomes meaningless. Every species learns that power is the only thing that matters, and loyalty is just a word you use until someone stronger comes along. That is the reality of galactic politics, I said. Then we're to change reality. He turned to Jameson. How long until the fleet is ready? 72 hours for full deployment. We can have advanced forces in Karathi space in 18. Do it, and send a message to the Vrex Dominion. Tell them that humanity recognizes the Karathi Empire as a sovereign ally under formal protection treaty. Any military action against Karathi territory will be treated as an act of war against the Terran Alliance. Jameson saluted and moved to execute the orders. I stood frozen, watching humanity prepare for war that every strategic analysis said they could not win. You understand, I said slowly, that the Concordance will not support you in this. The Vrex are too powerful. Most species will condemn your aggression and distance themselves from the conflict. I know, Okonkwo said, and when we win, which we will, despite your calculations, they'll all pretend they supported us the whole time. That's how it works. You cannot win. Watch us. He moved toward the communication center, already issuing orders, coordinating with military commanders across 4 systems, transforming from diplomat to war leader with seamless efficiency. I followed, compelled by something I still could not name. Over the next 6 hours, I watched humanity prepare for total war with a species 40 times their size. I watched them calculate not for victory, but for maximum damage to the enemy. I watched them plan strategies based not on winning battles, but on making the Vrex pay such a high price that continued aggression would be economically unsustainable. It was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure. At hour 7, something unexpected happened. The Thren Collective transmitted a formal declaration of military support for humanity's defense of the Karathi Empire. Their quantum computational analysis, they claimed, indicated that allowing the Vrex to annex Concordance members would create unacceptable systemic instability. 30 minutes later, the Pelthian Commonwealth pledged their advanced medical technology to support human military operations. An hour after that, 17 minor species declared their intention to provide logistical support, citing the principle of collective defense. By hour 12, 43 Concordance member species had formally aligned with humanity's position, creating the largest military coalition in galactic history. The Vrex Dominion, facing unified opposition they had not anticipated, withdrew their annexation threat and requested diplomatic negotiations. Humanity had won without firing a single shot. I found Ambassador Okonkwo in his office, reviewing casualty projections for a war that would now never happen. He looked exhausted and relieved in equal measure. You risked everything on the assumption that other species would support you, I said. No, he shook his head. We risked everything on the principle that collective defense means collective defense. The fact that other species agreed with us was a bonus, not the plan. You would have fought alone. Yes, and you would have lost. Yes, yet you were prepared to do it anyway. He looked up at me with eyes that held something I had never seen in 12 cycles of diplomatic analysis. Not calculation, not strategy, not careful political maneuvering, conviction. Analyst Thraxic, he said quietly, I've spent 3 years building relationships with species across this concordance. Not alliances of convenience. Not strategic partnerships pending better offers. Real relationships based on mutual respect and genuine commitment. And you know what I've learned? What? That most species are desperate for someone to actually mean what they say. They're tired of the careful hedging and strategic ambiguity and calculated betrayals. They want to believe that treaties can mean something, that commitments can be honored, that civilization can be built on something more stable than temporary mutual advantage. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked Concordance Station Prime. We're not better than anyone else. We're not smarter or stronger or more advanced. We're just willing to commit completely and then follow through on that commitment even when it's catastrophically expensive. And apparently, in a galaxy full of species who've forgotten how to do that, complete commitment looks like a superpower. It is also a profound vulnerability. Yes, he agreed, but you know what's more vulnerable? A civilization built on the assumption that everyone will betray everyone else eventually, because that assumption guarantees the betrayals will happen. It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy of distrust and abandonment. He turned back to face me. Humans are trying to create a different prophecy, one where loyalty is rewarded, where commitments are honored, where species can build something together that's stronger than what any of them could build alone. Maybe it won't work. Maybe we'll get betrayed and crushed and forgotten. But at least we'll try to build something better than the cynical, calculated, self-interested mess that passes for galactic civilization right now. I stood in silence, processing his words against 12 cycles of data and analysis. Everything I had learned about galactic politics said he was wrong, said that loyalty was a weakness, that commitment was inefficient, that survival required calculated self-interest above all else. But everything I had witnessed in the past 3 weeks said he was right. I must submit my report to Concordance. I said finally, I know. What do you think I should recommend? He smiled. That's not really my call, is it? You're the analyst. I'm just a crazy human who thinks friendship matters more than strategic advantage. You are considerably more than that. He moved back to his desk, suddenly looking very tired. Sometimes I wonder if we're just fooling ourselves. If all this talk about loyalty and commitment is just a sophisticated rationalization for the fact that we're too emotionally unstable to make proper strategic calculations. Do you truly believe that? He was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. I believe humans have figured out something that most species forgot somewhere along the way to building galactic civilization. We figure out that the only way to build something that lasts is to actually care about it, to invest not just resources, but emotion and identity and genuine commitment. That's messy and inefficient, and sometimes catastrophically painful. But it's also the only thing that creates civilizations worth preserving. He looked at me with sudden intensity. Your report is going to shape how the Concordance interacts with humanity for the next century. So I'll ask you directly, Analyst Thraxic. Do you want to live in a galaxy built on careful calculation and strategic hedging? Or do you want to live in a galaxy where commitments mean something and species actually stand with each other when things get hard? I thought about the Forlac backing down from the Pelthians, about the Thren requesting tactical consultation despite philosophical objections, about 43 species uniting behind a principle instead of calculating individual advantage. I thought about 12 cycles of watching alliances crumble the moment they became inconvenient. And I thought about 6 hours of watching humanity prepare for a war they could not win because a treaty they had signed actually meant something to them. I will submit my report tomorrow, I said, and I believe the Concordance will find my conclusions unexpected. Okonkwo smiled. I look forward to reading it. I left the human embassy as station chronometers indicated the start of a new cycle. The corridors were quiet, most species having retreated to their quarters after the diplomatic chaos of the previous day. I returned to my office and began composing my report. I wrote for 11 hours without pause, assembling data and analysis and 12 cycles of accumulated expertise into a comprehensive assessment of humanity's role in galactic affairs. And at the end, I wrote a conclusion that would have shocked the analyst I had been 3 weeks earlier. Humanity represents a fundamental paradigm shift in galactic strategic culture. Their approach to alliance building is inefficient, emotionally driven, and strategically inconsistent with established best practices. It is also remarkably effective precisely because of these apparent flaws. Traditional alliance frameworks assume rational actors pursuing calculated self-interest. Humanity violates this assumption by introducing genuine emotional commitment as a strategic variable. This creates unpredictability that conventional strategic models cannot accommodate. More significantly, human commitment appears to inspire reciprocal commitment in allied species. The formation of the 43-member coalition during the Rex crisis demonstrates that humanity's emotional approach resonates with widespread desire for more stable international frameworks. This analyst recommends full integration of human diplomatic methodology into concordant strategic planning. The risks of human unpredictability are outweighed by the benefits of genuine alliance cohesion. Furthermore, this analyst recommends formal recognition that loyalty, commitment, and emotional investment are not strategic weaknesses, but potentially decisive advantages when deployed systematically. Humanity has demonstrated that the most powerful weapon in galactic politics is not military force or economic leverage, but the willingness to actually mean what you say and follow through regardless of cost. The Concordance faces a choice. We can continue building civilization on calculated self-interest and strategic flexibility, accepting that our alliances will remain fragile and our collective security will remain theoretical. Or we can learn from humanity that some things are worth more than strategic advantage, that civilization is built not on careful calculation, but on commitments we honor even when it hurts. This analyst recommends we choose the latter, because I have spent 12 cycles watching empires rise and fall on the strength of their alliances, and I have learned in 3 weeks with humanity that the only alliances that matter are the ones people are willing to die for. Humanity is willing to die for their allies. The question Concordance must answer is whether we are willing to live up to the standard they have set. I submitted my report at dawn station time. By midday, it had reached every Concordance member. By evening, I had been summoned to testify before the full assembly. I stood before 900 species and delivered my findings with the same analytical precision I had maintained for 12 cycles. But this time, the precision served a different conclusion. This time, I told them that loyalty mattered more than advantage, that commitment mattered more than calculation, that humanity, despite being smaller and weaker and newer to galactic politics than almost anyone else, had figured out the secret that everyone else had forgotten. The secret was simple. Treaties are not strategic tools. They are promises. And promises, if you mean them, can change everything. The Concordance voted 17 hours later. Humanity was granted full strategic partnership status, the first species to receive such designation in over a century. The Korathi sent a formal thank you message that included an invitation to establish permanent human military advisor positions throughout their empire. The Thren requested immediate tactical consultation, having achieved collective consensus that adaptation to human methodology was strategically necessary. Even the Forlax submitted a diplomatic overture, suggesting they might be interested in discussing potential collaboration. And Ambassador James Okonkwo, when informed of these developments, simply smiled and said, "Good, now we can get to work building something that lasts." I found myself in his office once again 3 days after my testimony. "You changed your mind," he observed. I reevaluated the data, and I considered the question carefully. 12 cycles of evidence. 3 weeks of revelation. A galaxy forever transformed by a species that refused to stop caring. I had spent 12 cycles studying alliances. I said finally, but I had forgotten what they were actually for. They are not tools for strategic advantage. They are promises we make to each other. And promises, if they mean nothing, are worse than useless. Their lies dressed in diplomatic language. Okonkwo poured 2 drinks, mineral suspension for me, bourbon for himself. Humanity has reminded the galaxy what promises actually mean. I continued. You have demonstrated that commitment is not weakness, that loyalty is not inefficiency, that caring about something enough to fight for it when the calculations say to quit is not irrationality. It is the only thing that has ever built anything worth preserving. I raised my glass. To promises we keep. He raised his. To promises we keep. We drank in silence for a moment, watching the stars through the viewing port. Analyst Thraxic, Okonkwo said eventually, "You spent 12 cycles observing galactic politics. In all that time, have you ever seen anything like what happened this week?" I considered the question. No, I admitted, I have never seen 43 species unite behind a principle. I have never seen a military superpower back down without a shot fired. I have never seen the galaxy choose hope over calculation. Neither have we, he said quietly. Honestly, we were terrified. We still are. Every day, we wonder if this is a day it all falls apart. If we'll finally push too hard, trust too much, care too deeply, and watch everything burn. But you keep doing it anyway. He smiled. That's the thing about humans. We're optimists. Stupid, stubborn, irrational optimists. We look at a galaxy full of cynicism and betrayal and calculated self-interest, and we think, maybe we can do better. Maybe we can build something different. Maybe if we just keep showing up and keeping our promises long enough, everyone else will remember that they can too. And if they don't, then we go down fighting for something that mattered. He set his glass down. That's not a bad way to end, analyst. Fighting for something that mattered. I thought about my report, about the conclusion that had shocked so many, about the truth I had finally allowed myself to see. Humanity is the best and worst ally the galaxy has ever seen, I said. The best, because you will never abandon those you call friends. The worst, because you will never forgive those who betray you. You are walking contradictions, emotional and strategic, loyal and vengeful, irrational and brilliant. Is that your official assessment? That is my official assessment. I paused, and my personal opinion is that the galaxy is better for having you in it, even if you terrify us all. Alconquo laughed, a genuine, warm sound that filled the room. Analyst Thraxic, he said, I think that's the nicest thing anyone has ever said about us. Then your standards are remarkably low. Probably. He stood, extending his hand. Thank you for seeing us, for understanding, for choosing to stand with us instead of just studying us from a distance. I took his hand. The gesture felt less foreign now. I did not choose, I said. The data chose for me. He grinned. Sure it did. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, I imagined civilizations rising and falling on the strength of words they chose to honor or abandon. Humanity had chosen to honor theirs, and I had chosen to stand with them, because some things, I had learned, were worth more than strategic advantage. Some things were worth fighting for even when you knew you might lose. And some things, the most important things, were worth meaning when you said them. Treaties, alliances, promises, friendship, all the things that held civilization together when the careful calculations failed and the strategic advantages evaporated. All that remained was the choice to stand or run. Humanity always chose to stand. And now, finally, I understood why that terrified everyone. Not because they were dangerous when they fought, but because they were inspiring when they refused to abandon the people they had promised to protect. Inspiration, I was learning, was far more dangerous than any weapon humanity had ever built, because weapons could be countered. But a civilization built on genuine commitment to shared principles, that could change everything. And humanity, whether the galaxy was ready or not, was determined to prove it, one alliance at a time, one promise kept, one impossible stand against overwhelming odds, until everyone else remembered what they had forgotten. That loyalty was not a weakness. Commitment was not inefficiency, and caring about something enough to fight for it when the calculations said to quit was not irrationality. It was the only thing that had ever built anything worth preserving. I raised my glass once more. To humanity, the best and worst allies the galaxy had ever seen, and the only ones who had ever made me believe that civilization could be something more than carefully calculated mutual exploitation. They were reshaping the galaxy one kept promise at a time, and I was honored to witness it.